The crowd laughed, the kind of cruel, echoing laughter that pierces deeper than words. On the steps of City Hall, under a gray October sky, Councilman Rourke held a microphone and pointed mockingly at a frail man with torn gloves and sunburned cheeks. "You, Mayor?" Rourke said with a smug grin. "Sir, you can't even afford a belt." The cameras caught everything: the homeless man's flushed face, the forced chuckle that masked humiliation, the way his fingers curled tightly into fists at his sides. His name was Elias. He had simply asked a question about city funding and ended by sharing a dream, one spoken in a whisper, half to himself. "I'd like to be mayor one day." Rourke made it a punchline. The news reporters chuckled, and the live stream surged with heartless comments. But in that instant, something changed in Elias. He didn't walk away in shame. He stared into the crowd with fire in his eyes, not rage, but something rarer. Conviction. Kind that doesn't scream, it endures. The moment exploded online. Within hours, clips of the confrontation went viral. Morning shows aired it with cruel smiles, using words like delusional and delightfully absurd. Rourke's staff even posted a meme of Elias's face, photoshopped into a cartoon crown with the caption, "King of Nowhere." In a fluorescent-lit newsroom, a junior producer clicked replay for the 50th time. "People love this," she muttered. But not everyone laughed. In the corner of a tiny apartment, an elderly woman with a weathered face watched silently, eyes filling with tears. She whispered, "That boy was always good." That night, Elias sat in his usual spot behind the abandoned train station, the cold biting deeper than usual. He didn't have a blanket, just a shredded coat and a plastic bag for a pillow. But he wasn't trembling from the wind. He was awake, eyes wide, jaw clenched. The laughter still echoed, but it couldn't smother what had been lit inside him. His fingers gripped a crumpled notebook, one of the few possessions he carried. Inside, names were written. Ideas. Community centers, outreach clinics, school reforms. He wasn't crazy. He just hadn't been heard. Yet. Years ago, Elias wore a tie. He taught 6th grade civics in a rundown public school on the South Side. He believed in the system once. He taught his students about voting, responsibility, and dreaming big. His voice used to fill the halls, strong and full of hope. But the school closed. Budget cuts, they said. He got laid off, then lost his apartment 3 months later. One thing after another until all that remained was memory. But the way he spoke back then, that voice, it still lived inside him. As dawn crept over the city skyline, Elias didn't sleep. He stared into the pink-tinged clouds above the rooftops and made a silent promise. They would not laugh forever. Not at him. Not at anyone who dared to dream out loud. For every jeer, he'd take a step. For every insult, a plan. He would rise, not just for himself, but for everyone pushed to the edge. And one day, he would stand on those same city hall steps, not as a joke, but as the man with the last word. Before the streets, there was a home. Small, modest, worn, but filled with warmth. Elias once lived with his wife Lena and their daughter Ava, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the South Side. Mornings were filled with jazz from the radio and the scent of cinnamon coffee. He'd iron his shirt while Lena braided Ava's hair, both giggling like the world couldn't touch them. Elias was a civics teacher, underpaid but proud. Every morning he told his class, "You're citizens now, not someday. Right now, you matter." That belief anchored him. But even belief needs food, rent, and medicine. And when the city slashed education budgets, Elias lost more than a job. Within 6 months, Lena was working double shifts, Ava had to transfer schools, and Elias was slipping, emotionally and financially. The fall didn't happen all at once. It was quiet, slow, like a faucet dripping until the sink overflows. The day the pink slip came, Elias didn't tell Lena right away. He just sat in his car for hours, engine off, listening to the rain hammer the windshield. He felt like a failure. Teaching wasn't just a job, it was who he was. He'd given speeches at PTA meetings, led student marches for better school lunches. But the principal hadn't even made eye contact. "We're sorry, Mr. Price. The funding's just not there." That night, Lena knew without asking. She placed her hand on his shoulder in silence as he stared at the wall. He whispered, "What happens when the guy who taught kids how to fight the system becomes another one chewed up by it?" They tried. They really did. Lena picked up extra shifts at the hospital. Elias took on tutoring gigs, delivered groceries at night, sold his books. Still, the bills stacked faster than their hope. Ava's asthma medication cost more than groceries. The landlord wouldn't wait. And one morning, with nowhere left to turn, they packed what they could into trash bags and old suitcases. Lena moved in with her sister, 3 states away. Elias stayed behind, told Ava he needed to fix some things. She asked, "Will you still come to my birthday?" Elias smiled, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." But that was the last time he saw her in person. Elias's first night on the street was cold, loud, and cruel. The city doesn't whisper to the unhoused, it screams. Sirens shouting, the metallic thunder of subway tracks overhead. He found a place behind a boarded-up deli, where the smell of grease still clung to the walls. That night, he didn't cry. He was too exhausted. Instead, he stared at the stars, trying to remember what it felt like to be somebody. People walked by, eyes averted, headphones in. To them, he was already invisible. But Elias wasn't gone. Not yet. He folded his coat tighter, curled against the wall, and whispered a name into the dark. Ava. Then he closed his eyes, promising himself he'd keep going, one more day. Long before the press conference, Elias had met Councilman Rourke. It was a community forum, and Elias had come, still housed then, to advocate for youth programs. He brought charts, notes, and his teaching credentials. Rourke didn't even look up from his phone. "We've heard enough idealism for one night," the councilman said with a dry laugh. "If you want something done, try winning an election first." The room had chuckled. Elias remembered clutching his papers tighter, heart racing with embarrassment. But he also remembered thinking, "Maybe I will." That night planted a seed. He didn't know it then, but the same man who belittled him in private would later try to humiliate him in public. And that second moment would awaken something the first only wounded. Elias had hoped for kindness from the shelter. Instead, he found a line stretching around the block and a man at the door yelling, "No more beds." That night, a fight broke out over a blanket. Someone bled. Elias backed away, clutching his notebook tighter than ever. He started sleeping near the library, quieter, safer. There, he began to write again. Not just about survival, but about change. "We don't need handouts," he scribbled. "We need a seat at the table." His pages filled with thoughts on housing rights, police reform, and dignity. He didn't know who would ever read them. But he wrote anyway, because words made him feel human again. One cold night, Elias saw a teenage boy arguing with 2 older men on a corner. He recognized the signs: pressure, desperation, a deal about to go wrong. Elias stepped in. "Hey," he said calmly, "I think you dropped something." The boy looked confused, but Elias gestured subtly and walked away. After a beat, the kid followed. Around the block, Elias handed him a granola bar and asked his name. "Jordan," he mumbled. "That was my age when I lost my dad," Elias said. "You don't owe these streets your life." Jordan didn't answer. But he came back the next day. And the next. Elias had saved one soul. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of saving more. Elias wasn't just surviving anymore, he was organizing. Every week, he'd gather a handful of unhoused individuals in a nearby park and talk about sanitation, community protection, and ways to be seen. He convinced a local diner to donate leftover food. Someone found gloves in a donation bin. Together they started cleaning up sidewalks, not to impress anyone but to reclaim their dignity. They want to pretend we're trash, Elias said. Let's show them we are neighbors. And slowly, people noticed. Not everyone, but enough. A clerk dropped off trash bags one morning. A bus driver gave them free rides. Hope didn't come as a flood, it came in drops. Elias showed up to a city council meeting, holding the same notebook he'd written in behind dumpsters and train stations. He wasn't on the agenda. Security tried to block him, but a junior council member whispered, "Let him speak." He stepped to the mic, his coat frayed, his boots muddy, but his voice, clear as a bell. "I don't want charity. I want representation. You talk about the city. Well, I am the city too. And I've got plans." Some scoffed. Others stared in stunned silence. No one forgot him. He walked out without applause, but something shifted in that chamber. The ignored man had been heard. He didn't tell anyone, but Elias began crafting something radical, a campaign. No donors, no party. Just ideas and grit. He drew up plans in the margins of his notebook, calculating bus routes for voter canvassing. He read legal codes at the library, until it closed. What if a homeless man ran for mayor, he wrote. Not as a joke, as a witness. As a truth teller. The idea scared him. But not as much as staying invisible. He'd already been mocked once on those city hall steps. But if they were going to laugh again, it would be while watching him file the paperwork to run. A local reporter named Marcy stumbled across Elias during a routine ride-along. She expected a cliché, one more hopeless figure on the street. But Elias stunned her. He wasn't just articulate, he was visionary. He spoke of tax loopholes, community-led housing initiatives, restorative justice. "You don't want pity?" she asked. Elias chuckled. "No, I want policy." Intrigued, Marcy asked to follow him for a day. What she captured wasn't a sob story. It was a grassroots movement in its infancy. She titled her piece, "The Man Who Should Be Ignored." And when it aired, everything changed. Not because Elias begged for sympathy, but because he made sense. The story spread like wildfire. Social media lit up. Clips of Elias speaking played on phones in cafes, barber shops, and buses. People didn't laugh this time. They listened. A local pastor reposted the segment, calling Elias a prophet in rags. Donations began trickling in, not money but gear. Jackets, hygiene kits, phone cards. A retired printer offered to make flyers. "We believe in you," a handwritten note read. For the first time in years, Elias stood in front of a mirror, trying on a donated blazer. It was too big. He smiled anyway. He didn't look like a politician. He looked like a fighter. And that was more than enough. Word reached City Hall. Councilman Rourke's tone shifted. In private he laughed, but in meetings his voice tightened. Keep him off ballots, he ordered aides. Find something. Anything. But Elias had anticipated that. He filed independently, citing obscure legal statutes he'd studied in the library. Volunteers helped collect signatures. A lawyer, once evicted herself, reviewed his paperwork for free. When the Board of Elections tried to challenge him, Marcy returned with cameras. Transparency, she said. And when the press arrived, no one could stop the tide. Elias Price was officially listed as a candidate for mayor. The system tried to shut the door, but he'd already wedged his foot inside. The first debate was set in a crowded gymnasium. Rourke almost backed out when he learned Elias had qualified, but public pressure forced his hand. When Elias walked onto the stage, murmurs filled the room. He didn't hide his past. He wore it like armor. "I've eaten from dumpsters," he said. "I've also taught your children, cleaned your streets, and fought for neighbors when no one else would. If that disqualifies me, maybe it's the job that's broken, not me." Rourke's smirk faltered. For the first time, the man in the suit looked nervous. Elias hadn't just shown up, he'd arrived. After the debate, things moved fast. Elias's words echoed beyond city limits. National blogs picked up the clip. A crowdfunding page launched without his consent, and overflowed. Local businesses began endorsing him. Even former students, now grown, showed up in droves. One, now a journalist, tweeted, "He taught me to believe in systems. Now he's fixing the one that failed him." Elias didn't celebrate. He got back to work, walking neighborhoods, shaking hands, listening to pain no one else would hear. He didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like someone who never stopped living among the people. And the people? They were finally listening. The night before the final debate, Elias sat alone at the back of the church where he sometimes volunteered. A single candle flickered beside him as he stared down at his notebook, dog-eared and full of sweat-stained ink. He didn't rehearse. He reflected. Every page told a chapter of his fall and his rise. At the altar, he lit another candle, for Lena, for Ava, for every name he remembered who didn't survive the streets. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we make them see." That night he didn't pray for victory. He prayed for clarity, for strength to speak the truth without rage, to show them dignity doesn't wear a tie. The debate hall was packed. Reporters elbowed for space. Lights blazed overhead. Rourke walked in flanked by aides, polished and smirking. Elias entered alone. He wore the same jacket he'd been given months earlier. His boots were clean but cracked. No teleprompter. No flash. Just fire. Rourke opened with rehearsed jabs. "We need experience, not fairy tales." The crowd chuckled. Elias didn't flinch. When it was his turn, he looked straight into the lens. "I've lived your worst days. I've heard your silence. I don't speak politics. I speak reality." The laughter stopped. The room leaned in. The tide shifted. As Elias spoke, something changed. Not just in the room, but across screens citywide. His voice didn't thunder, it resonated. "You've built a city that punishes the poor for being visible," he said. "You locked us out, then blamed us for knocking." Every sentence came from his life, not a script. Rourke tried to interrupt, but the moderator held up a hand. "Let him finish." And he did. Elias closed with a truth no one could argue. "I didn't get here despite the system. I got here because it failed me, and I'm still standing." The crowd erupted, not in polite applause, but something raw. Something real. Rourke scrambled. He brought up Elias's arrest record. 3 citations for sleeping in public, loitering, trespassing. But Elias was ready. "Those aren't crimes," he said. "Those are symptoms of a city with no mercy." Rourke fumbled. "Leadership requires decorum." Elias replied, "Leadership requires humanity." Silence fell. And then, applause. The moderator tried to regain order, but it was already too late. The audience had chosen their voice. That night, pundits didn't talk policy, they talked presence. Elias hadn't just survived the debate. He had dismantled the performance of politics and rebuilt it with truth. After the debate, Elias walked out alone into the cold night air. Reporters shouted questions, but he ignored them. He walked 5 blocks to the same bench where he'd once slept, years earlier, after losing everything. It was empty now, slick with rain. He sat for a moment, pulled his hood up and breathed. A stranger walked by, paused, then said, "You got my vote." Elias looked up, nodding with a quiet smile. No campaign rally. No cheering crowd. Just one voice, finally heard. That was enough, for now. But the city wasn't done watching. And Elias? He was just getting started. Election night arrived like a heartbeat holding its breath. The results trickled in, precinct by precinct, while Elias sat surrounded by volunteers in a community hall. No champagne, no balloons, just folding chairs, stale coffee, and raw nerves. Some dared to hope. Others stayed quiet. As the final district reported, silence fell. A beat passed. Then a shout, "He did it!" Cheers erupted, bodies leapt up, arms locked, tears flowed freely. Elias didn't cheer. He stood frozen, hands shaking. The impossible had become real. A man once mocked on those very city steps had just been elected to lead the city itself. The room roared, but Elias whispered, "Now the real work begins." Elias took his oath not in a designer suit, but in the same jacket he wore during his campaign, the one gifted to him when no one believed in him. As he raised his right hand, a hush fell across the city. News helicopters hovered, cameras flashed. But Elias only looked forward, into the sea of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical. Behind him, instead of a politician's entourage, stood former shelter residents, community organizers, and a young girl in a hoodie with a hand-lettered sign, "We are still here." When he finished his oath, Elias didn't smile for the cameras. He turned to the crowd and said, "Let's go to work." Day 1. No red carpet. No ribbon cutting. Elias walked through City Hall's main doors at 7:00 a.m., flanked by no one. The security guard hesitated, then saluted. "Welcome, Mr. Mayor." Elias nodded, stepped inside, and went straight to work. His first order wasn't flashy. It was a review of all pending evictions. His second, auditing every contract tied to luxury development. "We're not cleaning the city of the poor," he told his staff. "We are cleaning the rot from its core." Some officials resigned that week. Others stayed and learned. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was a reclamation. Within weeks, Elias launched the Second Start initiative, affordable housing for the unhoused, with job training, mental health support, and guaranteed city employment for enrollees. Critics called it naive. But the results silenced them. Streets once lined with tents now echoed with construction sounds. I know. Former addicts laid bricks. Ex-cons led teams. Elias didn't just approve budgets, he showed up, rolled up his sleeves, and listened. One man handed him a hammer. "Mayor Price," he joked, "you sure you know how to use that?" Elias grinned. "I built a movement from nothing. I can swing a hammer." And he did. Late one evening, Elias returned to the place where his journey began, the bench behind the train station. It was still there, rusted and cracked. He sat alone, listening to the hum of the city he now led. From a pocket, he pulled a folded photo of Ava, creased from years of weather and time. He whispered, "I kept my promise." Then he reached into his coat and placed a small plaque on the bench. "For the ones they forgot, may we never forget again." As he stood and walked away, the camera of a passing teen captured the moment. That image would go viral. Again. But this time, it wasn't ridicule. It was reverence. Elias stood in front of a fourth-grade civics class, the same age students he once taught long ago. The classroom buzzed with curiosity. One child raised his hand, eyes wide behind oversized glasses. "Is it true you used to be homeless?" Elias nodded. "Yes." The room fell silent. Another voice chimed in softer. "Then how did you become mayor?" Elias paused, then knelt to the child's level. "Because I never stopped believing that broken things can be rebuilt. Even people. Even cities." Around him, young faces lit up, not with pity, but with pride. In their eyes he wasn't a politician. He was proof. Proof that the system could fail someone, and they could still come back to lead it. At the edge of the city, Elias unveiled a memorial, a wall of names etched in steel. Names of the unhoused who had died on the streets over the last 10 years. "They were not invisible," he said during the dedication. "They were ignored, and today, that ends." The crowd gathered, hundreds strong. Some wore suits. Others came in blankets. A gospel choir sang softly in the background. As Elias placed a single white rose beneath the wall, the city grew still. For once, no one rushed away. They stayed and remembered. The wall didn't just carry names, it carried accountability. One afternoon, Councilman Rourke walked into City Hall, not to speak, but to wait. Elias found him seated outside his office. The years had softened his face, but the weight of defeat clung to him. "I came to apologize," Rourke said. "For laughing, for underestimating you." Elias looked him in the eye, steady, and unreadable. You didn't underestimate me, he said. You underestimated what happens when a whole city stops being afraid. Rourke offered a hand. Elias shook it, but only briefly. This seat doesn't belong to me, he added. It belongs to the people who never had one. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Rourke in silence. Ava called that evening. Her voice was deeper now, teenaged, distant, but curious. I saw the video of the memorial, she said. You did good, Dad. Elias sat in his office alone, the phone trembling slightly in his hand. I wanted you to see who I became, he whispered. Not because I had to, but because you needed to know I kept going. There was a long pause. Then, I'm proud of you. Elias blinked quickly, staring out at the skyline from his window. Can I visit? She asked. He smiled through his tears. You never have to ask. And in that moment, he wasn't just a mayor. He was a father, reclaiming more than a city. He was reclaiming time. As the sun set behind the skyline, Elias walked alone through the city he now led, not as a ruler, but as a witness. He passed murals painted by artists he once fed. He nodded to shopkeepers who once offered him a cup of coffee with no questions. And when he reached the edge of a rooftop overlooking the city lights, he whispered the words that had once been mocked. I want to be mayor. But this time, he smiled. Because now, it wasn't a dream. It was memory. Legacy. Proof that no one is too broken to rise. That dignity doesn't come from wealth, but from choosing to stand, even when the world says you shouldn't.